to item number 2, which is a briefing and our discussion on the emergency housing resources and policies for residents impacted by COVID-19 and our housing strategy as it relates to COVID-19. So I'll let the staff move forward. Do you guys need me to do anything for your PowerPoint to pop up, or does AV have that covered?
I've got it on my end.
Great, thank you. Sorry, Mandy, I think I need to unmute you. There you go. And we're joined by Councilmember Harvard Madison. Good morning.
Perfect. Okay, great. Thank you. This is Mandy DeMayo, Community Development Administrator for the City of Austin Neighborhood Housing and Community Development. And today I'm going to go through emergency rental assistance for Austin tenants that are impacted by COVID-19. And I believe I cannot control the slide. So if we could just advance to the next slide. Fantastic. So
Chair,
today we're
one quick question. I'm very sorry to interrupt. It looks like the backup links on this item are not working, but the other items, the backup links are working. So I was hoping maybe IT could help solve that while we're going through the slides.
Or if you can even email it to the members of the committee, that would be great. And then maybe get it online as soon as you can as well.
Are you all able to see the presentation?
We
Yes.
we can all see it.
Okay,
Yes.
perfect.
Thank
Okay,
you.
great. Okay, so
Thank you
today
for
we're going
bringing
to
that
go.
up,
I'm sorry?
Sorry, Mandy, I was just thanking Paige for having brought that up. I didn't notice that.
Okay, great. Today's agenda regarding emergency rental assistance, we're going to talk briefly about the rent relief pilot program, which occurred in May. Then we're going to talk about what we're calling Rent 2.0, the second iteration of the rental assistance program, the overall budget, program eligibility, and the structure of the program, and then some ancillary wraparound tenant stabilization services, our marketing and outreach strategy, and then timeline for launching the program. So if we can go to the next slide, that would be great. Okay, as you all know, we launched Rent, which was the relief for emergency needs of tenants in early May. This was a partnership with HACA, the Housing Authority of the City of Austin. We utilized Housing Trust Fund dollars, so local dollars, $1.256 million in direct rental assistance. The eligibility for the program was households at or below 80% median family income who lived in the city limits, were on a standard lease, and could demonstrate that they were impacted by COVID-19. When the program was all said and done, we served 1,681 households. 2/3 of those households approximately were at or below 30% of the median family income. And we summarized the program and the demographics in a July 8th memo that went to the mayor and city council. We learned a lot of lessons in our brief time working on the rent program. We know that we provided a significant amount of relief for tenants, but we also learned that the program, the administration of the program, was a heavy lift. It was an intensive program to administer. There was a very short lead time for this program. We pulled it together over a period of a couple of weeks, launched in early May. There was extensive case management that was required. There was a lot of back and forth between tenants and back and forth between landlords as well. We also learned that we created a pretty complicated rent calculation in terms of the relief that we would provide, and fairly complex landlord certification. So again, those are lessons learned. If we can move to the next slide. As a result of our pilot program in May, we took a little bit of a step back, and we have created a comprehensive and holistic strategy to keep tenants in their homes. This includes both direct rental assistance plus eviction prevention and stabilization services. The funding for the program comes from coronavirus relief funds. That's really the lion's share of the funding, plus general funds, plus CDBG-CV, which is federal funding, but focused on coronavirus relief. And this is, of course, all based on the council-approved spending framework that was authorized last month. The funding that we have pulled together is dedicated to three primary areas. One, which is the lion's share, is direct rental assistance. Two is tenant stabilization services. And then three is really targeted community outreach. I want to talk first, we can go to the next slide. I want to talk first about the direct rental assistance program. What does rent, this new iteration, the direct assistance, what does it look like? Well, I will tell you, it is similar to the first iteration in May, Rent 1.0, we're calling it. But we have a focus on targeting specific populations and streamlining the program. Some of the improvements that we're seeing is one, continued partnership with HACA, Housing Authority of the City of Austin, which is actually the contract will be bolstered by a subcontract with CBR Associates, which is a nationally recognized consulting firm with 25 plus years of experience administering housing choice voucher programs for large municipalities across the country, including the city of Los Angeles, the city of Chicago, and New York City. Another improvement we're pretty excited about is the determination that extremely low income households, so those households that are below 30% median family income, will be eligible for multiple months, up to 3 months of rental assistance, while households between 30 and 80% median family income will be eligible for up to 1 month of assistance. We are, per council direction, accepting both traditional and non-traditional leases. That was something we heard loud and clear from City Council, was the contemplation of folks who are living in alternative arrangements like extended stay hotels. We also decided that rather than paying up to a certain amount of rent and having the tenant paying the remainder, we are going to be paying the full contract rent amount. So that will be an increased rental benefit for most households. And then, of course, we have enhanced funding over a 6-month period. If we can go on to the next slide. I also want to highlight, in addition to our direct rental assistance, something unique about what we're calling Rent 2.0 that we're launching is our tenant stabilization programs. It's a full suite of programs and services to complement emergency rental assistance. We will be serving Austinites who are not yet displaced, Austinites who may have back fees owed, whether that's back rent or utilities or other fees, late fees. And also serving Austinites who may be in some stage of the eviction process. Those services are going to be provided through contracts with local nonprofit organizations, and the services are going to include landlord-tenant mediation, eviction defense services, so representation in eviction court, as well as direct funding for right to cure for households that do have any back rent due, late payments due, in order to avoid eviction. Go on to the next slide. I wanted to talk briefly about targeted outreach. I mentioned that before. We learned a lot from the first iteration of the program, who we were reaching and who we were not reaching. Again, as I mentioned previously, about 2/3 of the households served in the first iteration of Rent in May were extremely low income. So households at or below 30% of median family income. But when we look at data from the Equity Action Team, we know that African American households and families with children are twice as likely to face eviction as white households. We also know from Austin Public Health that people of color and communities of color are disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. Our goal is to help those low-income renters who are the most impacted by COVID-19. As a result, we're doing very targeted outreach to communities of color, families with children, veterans, and also persons with disabilities. If we can go on to the next slide, just want to expand a little bit on our expanded outreach. We have developed internally a comprehensive communication and outreach strategy. We will be releasing a solicitation for community-based organizations to help reach underserved and underrepresented communities in creative and far-reaching ways. Materials and outreach will be provided in multiple languages. We're working with both HACA, CDR, and all of the community groups to deliver a holistic response to the looming eviction crisis and the economic fallout from COVID-19. We go on to the next slide, which is the final slide. You'll see a timeline and next steps to give you an idea of where we are and where we want to be in the near future. So right now we're finalizing contracts with HACA and subcontractors. That will occur, that is occurring as we speak, actually, in the month of July. We're also finalizing contracts with direct nonprofit providers for tenant stabilization services. That will also occur in the month of July. We are putting out our solicitation, which will be a request for applications for community outreach. That will also occur this month. We anticipate program launch in the month of August. And one thing to note, right now we have budgeted 6 months of direct rental assistance. Because of the funding, we'll be sequencing our funding because our coronavirus relief funds from the Department of Treasury need to be expended by the end of the calendar year. That doesn't mean that the program will end the end of the calendar year. It means that we will be utilizing those funding sources first and then moving on to alternative funding sources like general fund and CDBG-CV, which have less of a tight time frame, and we'll be extending the program into January, as long as there is a need, into January and potentially beyond. So if we go to the next slide, it really is just an opportunity for questions. We've been working hard on this over the last 2 months, really taking a deep dive into the data for the first iteration of the rent program and looking at how we can enhance and improve and expand the program to better serve the community in the coming months.
Thank you so much, Mandy, and I appreciate everybody that's worked so hard on this. We'll take some questions first. Councilmember Harper Madison, and then Councilmember Kitchen.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. I appreciate you recognizing me. Good morning, colleagues. Thank you for the presentation, Mandy. I really appreciate it. You actually answered a lot of the questions that I was coming into this with. So I will just say, I would love to get some additional information about the targeted outreach programs. So I think I misunderstood what you originally said. It sounded like it was already happening, in which case I had a list of questions about how that was happening. But it sounds to me like if there's a solicitation for community orgs, it's not happening yet. Can you clear that up for me?
Sure. So we have developed, our communications team at NHCD has developed an overall strategy. We'll be doing a lot of targeted outreach internally, but we are really depending on our community partners to reach those communities that are hardest to serve. And that's where the solicitation comes in. We'll be launching the outreach internally, and it will be bolstered by community groups as a result of the solicitation. The solicitation will go out this month, so certainly within the next 2 weeks. We are giving community groups a 30-day turnaround time in order to provide them ample time to assess their current capacity and resources and ability to provide that kind of outreach. In the RFA, we have really provided a suite of services ranging from very easy to accomplish, like agreeing to post things about the rent program on social media, to much more intensive, really, I would say hand-holding, but in the time of COVID-19, hand-holding is probably not going to be possible, but really assisting folks who may have access challenges to a digital application, assisting them with uploading documentation, much more of that one-on-one intensive outreach. So it's really a range of services. We're asking community groups to let us know what they think they can provide, and we're providing funding from $1,000 up to $50,000.
Okay, well, so I really appreciate that clarification. I would like to ask respectfully that my at the very least, and everybody else can obviously chime in to advocate for themselves, their districts, and their constituents as well, but my office would definitely love to be a part of both the internal and external dialogue around outreach efforts. For no other reason, I think there are several of us on the call who are actively engaged in some outreach and to some degree to some of those populations of folks that you made reference to, those really hard to reach populations. I know for a fact that myself and Greg are doing some of those outreach efforts currently. I literally have a pilot that launched yesterday in District 1, where we have a community organization that's going door to door and conducting a community needs assessment. So just in order to make that as robust as possible and potentially assist the effort that NHCD is going to be putting forward, I'd love very much for us to have some conversations about exactly how it's happening and what vehicles we could possibly share, what information we might have been able to gauge in our time in that we could share. And I know Greg's got a lot of experience working with the St. John's neighborhood and those folks in the community. So I'd say now would be a really great time for us to pool our communication and outreach efforts, especially given that, you know, some of the data that I've been looking at shows that upwards of 28 million Americans are about to be experiencing housing insecurity, in which case I think now is definitely the time to take the resources that we have and make them stretch as far as we can. So as soon as you can put me in, Coach, we definitely would like to be a part of that extended conversation around outreach.
Fantastic. And council member, we're going to have our communications folks reach out to you and your staff.
Excellent.
And we want to piggyback on whatever outreach you all are doing in your individual districts. We want to leverage resources. Our goal is to reach as many folks as possible and as many hard to serve folks as possible.
I think that's a great idea. I'd say additionally, you should probably reach out to Farah Muscadin. She's with the Office of Police Oversight, but she also happens to be our staff liaison for the Community Preparedness and Communication Cabinet. So there's a whole team, a whole tribe of folks that are working on communication and outreach. I mean, the production of videos, social media, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot already happening that you could really tap into there as well. So I would recommend making that connection also. I'm so happy to hear that we are addressing some of the non-traditional leases. That was one that just kept coming up for us. So I'm happy to hear that. I would like more information about CVR Associates, what their role is specifically. I understand that, you know, HACA only has so much in the way of bandwidth around housing choice vouchers, but I'd like to get a better understanding of what CVR's role is. And I think what I'll do is reach out to you offline so that I don't take up too much time here. Then the other question I had, you said something about CDBGCV, and it sounded like you said an extension to January. I just wanted to make sure I heard that correctly. So those funds don't have to be extended or expended by the end of 2020 calendar year?
That's correct. The coronavirus relief funds from the Department of Treasury have a hard and fast deadline of December 31st, 2020. So we're sequencing our funding, and the vast majority of the funding is the federal coronavirus relief funding, but we're going to be front loading those funds and then saving, quote unquote, our local funds and CDBG-CV because there is no specific timeline.
Okay.
I should also say that we're going to be utilizing our local funds, our general funds, for households applying who have undetermined citizenship status. So we're going to be dipping into our local funds to ensure that we serve the entire community, not just those with citizenship.
Excellent. I'm happy to hear that. The last question I would have about outreach efforts and initiatives is, are y'all working with, or would it be helpful to have some introductions to organizations that do advocacy in the space around specific segments of population? So for example, I've been having some really productive conversations with a couple of organizations that do veteran advocacy and a couple of organizations that do advocacy for differently able people, in which case, do y'all already have some connections and orgs that you're working with on those segments, or would some introductions be helpful?
Introductions would always be helpful. My approach is the more the merrier. I don't know if our internal contacts are the same as yours, and we want to make sure that, particularly with the solicitation, that we reach as many groups as possible, because we know that those community groups are the front-facing groups who know their populations better than we could ever know them.
Awesome, thank you. Mandy, if somebody, if one of our community members is watching this right now and they are having an aha moment of an organization they'd like to introduce you to, how would they best reach out to you?
They can email us directly at nhcb@austintexas.gov or contact our main phone number, 512-974-3100.
974-3100. So that's N as in Nancy, H as in house, C
Yes.
as in cat, D as in dog, at austintexas.gov.
You got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Kitchen.
Thank you very much, Mandy. I wanted to just talk. Well, first off, I wanted to. I'm very impressed with the work that Councilmember Harper Madison is doing, and I think she mentioned that you may be doing this also, Councilmember Kassar, in terms of reaching into the community in a very targeted, proactive way. And so I would appreciate learning from what you all are doing. There are parts of District 5 that I think that would be very helpful for. So Mandy, if you could connect me to the right person to see if there's a way that we can learn from what's happening in these other areas, and see if there's a way that we can contribute also. So if you would help me with that.
Okay, great.
And then I have a question that really, I'm trying to think through where we are for individuals that are really on the edge here. I know this program, I like the way you talked about looking at the full continuum for folks, for, stabilization and rent assistance, which is all designed to prevent folks from becoming homeless. But to me, it's all a continuum, and I would like us to be thinking about our homeless population at the same time. And I know we have some different pots of money, but that's the way I think of that, because instead of having, and I'm not suggesting they're siloed, but sometimes it feels like we got a bucket of approaches and funding for people with rental assistance needs and their at risk for becoming homeless. And then we're over here, once they become homeless, they fall into another pot. So I'm wanting to understand how these are coordinated in a way. So for example, our rental assistance program, what are we doing for the person who is ending up living on the streets or in a pro lodge, for example, who just needs their late payments on rent paid for, and then they can get into housing because they have a job. So that's one example. I'm just wanting to understand how this approach to rental assistance and tenant stabilization, how it's coordinated with what we're doing for people who are, have already fallen off the cliff and are homeless, because it's all a continuum.
Sure. Thank you for that question, Councilmember Kitchen. And I will say that we coordinate closely with our friends at Austin Public Health. And one of the recommendations from the national consultants who have looked at all of our various approaches to homelessness, one of their recommendations was to take a portion of the CDBG-CV dollars. You may recall, we were allocated, I believe it was $4.6 million. We're taking a portion of that. Only $2.6 million is going into the rent program, the direct emergency rental assistance. And the remainder is dedicated to people experiencing homelessness. We're using those funds in coordination with Austin Public Health to directly serve the population that was identified was folks who were in rapid rehousing, but their contract or their time through rapid rehousing was expiring. And so we'll be layering on the CDBG CV dollars to directly address the needs of that population. We've been working closely with ECHO and Austin Public Health on that issue. And that was presented as a part of the very complicated spending framework to council.
Okay, thank you. That's very, I really appreciate that. Does that get the person who is like the example that I gave you? Or do they already have to be receiving rapid rehousing dollars?
Those specific dollars are related to folks who are already in the rapid rehousing program. The example you
Okay.
gave was somebody in a pro lodge, and we are working with Austin Public Health and the homeless office on directing some local funds to provide housing relief to those exiting from the pro lodges. So that is
Okay.
a different source, but we are keenly attuned to the needs of that particular population.
Okay. I'd like some more details about that aspect of it. Whoever I need to talk to about that.
Okay, we'll get that to you.
Okay, great. So I appreciate that because it's it's all a continuum, and I'm wanting to make sure that we continue with helping folk. It sounds like it's on y'all's radar screen, and you're working very closely. I just don't want those to become two separate approaches, so that if particularly for those individuals that there's a range of needs that people have who are experiencing homelessness, and just a whole range of needs.
Yes.
But some folks experiencing homelessness, they just need a little bit of help with rent, and then they can get back into housing. So, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Mandy, I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
One is maybe just a request. If we could get a sense of how we're measuring COVID-19 impact, that could be useful. Do you all already have a set of the questions you would be asking or documentation you'd be requiring for COVID-19 impact?
So we've looked at cities across the country and what they require, and some of them range from some pretty intensive certifications to a simple self-certification. We are trying to land on a sweet spot that is yet to be determined, where we provide a decent amount of documentation from a monitoring perspective down the road. The federal government comes in, they want to make sure that this funding in fact did go to folks who were impacted by COVID-19. Typically in the first iteration of rent in May, it was simply a determination that income had dropped. And that was easy enough to provide between April and May. And sometimes it was an unemployment, something from Texas Workforce Commission. We tried to be as flexible as possible, and we will continue to try to be as flexible as possible, whether it is simply a self-certification, which would be the minimum bar, or some additional documentation to bolster that. But we are working through the details of that in our program guidelines for this upcoming iteration of rent.
As y'all get closer to landing or getting to those last questions, I think just even touching base with council offices that are interested could be good. My sense is that tending towards people being able to be eligible, I would always tend a little bit more that way. But let me know where you all land on that.
We
as
will.
As far as your numbers of how many families you intend to serve, do you have a total number that you're trying to get to? Because I think, what was it? It was just under 2,000 for Rent 1.0. Is that right?
So for Rent 1.0, it was 1,681 households, and the average amount of rent that we provided was somewhere around $765 of rental assistance for that month. The difference in the program, we think that we'll be serving around 2,000 households per month with this next iteration of rent. The difference is we are anticipating that we will be spending more per household, because you'll recall in the first iteration of rent, we had a ceiling of what we would provide for rental assistance. It was essentially fair market rent as determined by HUD minus utilities. It was a pretty complicated calculation. And then we also we backed out 30% of a applicant's adjusted gross income under the assumption that they would pay their 30%. So that is why we think that the rent assistance amount was frankly lower than anticipated. It was only around $760, the per household amount. We believe that that will go up because in this iteration, we have committed to paying the full contract rent. So we are ballparking at this point, and again, we'll be tweaking as we go, but we're ballparking that it'll be about $1,000 per household. And some of those households, of course, if they're 30% and below, will be eligible for 3 months of assistance. Our goal is to serve, right now, we're thinking 2,000 households a month.
And so 2,000 households a month, and you're thinking this program runs through December or January?
January, 6 months. And we're planning on launching in early August.
So 6 months, 2,000 folks a month, or 2,000 households a month. So the guess is 12,000 households.
That would be, now, keep in mind that 30% and below are going to be
Right, there might
eligible
be some
for multiple
duplicated households.
Exactly, exactly. And we would certainly want to provide for a household at 30% and below, we would want to provide that kind of, it's not a duplication of services per federal rules. We're able to provide up to 3 months of rental assistance. And we want to do that only for the very lowest of the low income.
Understood. So the idea is if it's 2,000 a month, in some cases, it's going to be the same family each for both months because they're in such
Correct.
need, if they're below 30% of the average Austin family. So you're going to do 2,000 times 6, that's 12,000 households, about 10 times more than Rent 1.0, and probably, might be 50% more dollars per household. And that all adds up as to why the program is about 10 times bigger than the old program.
Correct.
And it's my sense that, that the outreach should be pretty continuous then, because I assume you're going to get more families than you can accommodate in month 1, and then you'll keep on trying to accommodate them in later months. Is that the thinking?
That is correct. And so I should also point out from an administrative perspective, we are going to have an open application process. Let's just say that the applications open August 10th. And I'm making that date up right now. But somebody will submit an application. They won't have to submit an application every month. We'll do a randomized lottery each month. And if in fact you were not chosen for the randomized lottery, your application will carry forward. We want to make this as simple on both ends, really. From the resident perspective, we'll keep in contact with them, let them know, yes, you were chosen for the lottery. We'll need some additional documentation, or no, you were not chosen, but we are holding your application for next month's lottery. So we're trying to make it administratively easier on our end, but also the least burdensome possible on the residents' end.
I guess a question then is that if we know we have enough money for all these families across multiple months, we obviously don't know exactly how many, but have a good general sense. The reason we're only going to be delivering funds to 2,000 of those families each month does that have to do with their capacity to actually cover the administrative capacity to deal with that landlord and cover that rent? Is that the limiting factor as to why we're not doing, 4,000 across 3 months?
It's a combination of capacity, and it certainly is. I mean, if you think about it, somebody is actually cutting 4,000 checks or 2,000 checks, and they're gathering all of the 1099 data. I mean, it is, so administratively, yes, heavy lift, and capacity is certainly an issue. But we're also very mindful of the fact that somebody who can pay their rent in August might not be able to pay their rent in September or October. And everything we are hearing from a national perspective is that, of course, depending what happens with eviction moratoriums, both locally and federally, we're hearing that the fall is going to be a pretty intensive time period for folks having housing stability challenges. And so we don't want to spend all 17.75 million in August and September and then have an enormous need. So we're trying to be fairly conservative and spread the dollars out over this time period, recognizing that our funds need to be expended by the end. The vast majority of the funds need to be expended by the end of the calendar year.
And so it's an open application period. Is it rolling, or will you say, okay, for people that apply in these 2 weeks, the lottery is going to run their applications, and then for people that apply in these other, how?
It will be an open application period, but the lottery has to occur at a point in time. So we will announce, I'm making updates, application opens August 10th, and we say the lottery occurs on the 25th of every month. And that's when we do the randomized lottery and pull the folks who we think we can serve and gather the additional documentation.
Let me keep thinking about that. I think
Okay.
that is a good way to get a lot of people to apply. There might be, again, this is the first time I've heard it, so I'm just brainstorming here and would really want, I'll plan on talking to people who went through Rent 1.0 to figure out what worked best. But it might make sense, for example, if we know that month 1, we're going to serve 2,000, and month 2, we can serve another 2,000, to maybe alert all 4,000 of those families and let them know, hey, you're in the half that is going to get their rent paid by this month, and the other half, hey, you're going to get your rent paid by that month, so people can plan or have as much information as possible. Again, that there might, what I just said, there might be good reasons that doesn't work, but I think it's really useful to hear this so that we can go and talk with, especially with the folks that have gone and tried to sign people up, and with people that need to use these services to figure out what would be most useful for them, and then what's administratively possible for us. So thank you for explaining that, and we might just have to get back with you with whatever some of our thoughts might be, and we'll all try our best.
And that would be great. And I will say we're kind of hardening the program guidelines and the process as we are contracting over the next couple of weeks. But that is not to say, we've always looked at this program as iterative. And as we see, we're going to be constantly looking at demographics. We're not meeting people at 30% or below. We're not meeting the African-American community. We're not meeting people with disabilities. We'll be calibrating the program as we go along. We are trying to be as flexible and nimble as possible, knowing that our city council has very definite priorities, and we want to meet those priorities.
Thank you for that. And overall, I know this is just a huge program, something the city's never been able to do before, and we're coming together in this moment of crisis to make sure that nobody loses their housing because of the pandemic. That's a big goal, but it should be the goal, and thank you for working on it.
And I will say, I'm sorry, I just did want to say that, emergency rental assistance was something that we had contemplated. I know we've had city council conversations, and we've certainly had internal staff conversations about emergency rental assistance. It has always been a need. Before any of us knew what COVID-19 was, it was a need. Tenant stabilization services and eviction prevention, those have all been huge community needs. And this has really kickstarted and laid the foundation for what we think after we're all said and done and we never say the words COVID-19 again. We know that this is going to be an ongoing issue, and we want to be able to address those needs in the community. So this is really laying the foundation.
And I would add that my understanding is that the justices of the peace and Travis County are working to extend the eviction moratorium. I assume the city would also extend our moratorium to at least September 30th. So because we don't want anybody to lose their home while we are putting the emergency housing program back online. So this will help 10 times more people with many more dollars than we've ever put into the community before for rental assistance. And we need to do it before any eviction moratorium is lifted. So my understanding is that that moratorium should be extended so that everybody can get the help that they need and at least a little bit of peace of mind as it relates to their housing. Councilmember Kitchen.
I also understand that there may be some additional federal assistance. Obviously, we don't know yet, but they're looking at Congress is looking at an additional package that we should know about in the next I don't know, 2 weeks or so. So,
There's a certain senator from Kentucky who gets to decide whether there's a vote on that or not, and everybody should be advocating to their senators
exactly.
to put that on the table. Councilmember Renteria.
Yes, Mandy. I really want to thank you for that work y'all doing there. I just wanted to find out and see if you could tell me how much of that money that you're allocating for rental assistance comes from the Rising funds.
So none of that will be from the RISE funds. Those are separate and apart. So the entire, when I did the 17 point, there was a pie chart in the presentation. It was 17.75 million. That's a combination of general fund, which is separate from RISE. This is not dipping into RISE at all. RISE will be, we're looking at it as an added resource in the community. And again, this is separate and apart. The rest is federal funding, but 2.5 million is general fund dollars separate from RISE.
Okay. And are you planning on giving us a report on that, or it doesn't? You can just send it to my office if you when you get a chance and get hold of that. I would like to see what we're doing with that kind of money right now.
I'm sorry, with the RISE funding?
Yes.
Or, yeah, okay. Yes, we can certainly do that.
Okay. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
All right, is that it for this item? Thank you, Mandy. Our